Hello, I'm sitting here in Scottsdale, Arizona with Mr. Braun, Esquire, partner at Braun, Siler, Kruzel, PC. So you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Mr. Braun? Where are you from?
Well, originally from Chicago, left the slush-filled streets of Chicago for, at that time, the sun-filled arroyos of Fountain Hills back in 1993. Set up practice in Scottsdale. I'm an attorney. Our firm concentrates in state trust administration, estate tax and related issues, also some corporate work. But for the most part, we're considered a trust and estate firm. And that's my practice.
Have you always known that you'd wanted to be a trust and estate lawyer?
No, actually. I began working in law firms back in 1981. At the time, I was working as a paralegal, full-time, putting myself through school, law school at Northwestern undergrad, and then I went to law school at DePaul. But I had to work full-time while I was in law school, and in doing so, I was able to work at a large firm in downtown Chicago in the Loop, and I was able to work in a lot of different practice areas. And that's when I learned that I really wanted to do the trust and estate work, because I found it very interesting. As they say, I'm practicing in the area of unfortunately death and taxes, both of which are pretty much a certainty. So I felt like it was pretty much guaranteed job, which is important when you were 21 years old, that you'd be in a practice area that would be able to stand the test of time.
Yeah, it sounds like a product that applies to everybody.
Yes, it does. Unfortunately, it does.
When you first entered the tax and estate world, take me through your journey, because now you own your own practice. Take me through your journey from first entering tax and estate into building your own practice.
Oh gosh, I mean, to really go into it would be hours, but I had worked for, as I said, a large trust and estate, an actual general practice firm. As I finished my law degree, I actually got an offer from Arthur Andersen back when they were the largest accounting firm in the world, back in the early to mid 80s. Ended up working in their tax department, and was able to really get a grasp on a lot of income tax and estate tax and gift tax issues working for them. And then after a few years there, the same law firm I had worked for as a law clerk essentially hired me back as a lawyer, and I worked for them until '93. And then in '93, I, for quality of life choices and other issues, moved my practice down here, worked for a couple of firms the first couple years, and then basically went out on my own in 1995 after 2 years here, working for other firms. Formed my own firm, and now we are Braun, Siler, Kruzel, and we're 15 people under a roof.
Okay, what were some of the challenges of when you first started your firm?
Well, the real challenge is most lawyers are really not equipped to be business managers. We spend all our time honing our skills as a lawyer and not necessarily as a manager. And something they do not teach you in law school is how to manage a business. Yeah. So that's always a challenge, and with it comes the HR portion, which I was fairly familiar with because I had worked for other people for 15 years, and I knew what I liked in administrative philosophies and what I didn't like, and tried to implement those as a manager. So the HR was something that although it's challenging, I felt like I had a leg up on that. The financial aspects of the practice, and of course the IT, which I still struggle with. Because I am kind of a dinosaur when it comes to IT, but fortunately there are other people in the firm that are not.
Yeah, right.
So that's always been a challenge, but the HR and the managing of the firm and trying to run a business are always a challenge while you're still trying to service your client to the best of your abilities and in their best interests. Mm-hmm.
Would you say any of those challenges are still ongoing for you?
Certainly the IT. And people are people, so HR is challenging, but in a positive way. But that's always ongoing as you bring people into the firm and acclimate new hires and all those kinds of issues, and as you try to grow the practice, that HR issue is constantly there, as is again the IT.
Right. Now that we've gone over some of your early life as a lawyer and then some of your struggles of starting your business, what advice would you go back and give yourself if you could go back, say, 10 or 20 years?
I would probably say don't lose a lot of sleep as issues arise, because you usually find out that they really are issues, they're not problems, and that the issues can be resolved, and they eventually will be resolved. They don't linger forever, and worrying about them is wasted energy. Certainly, spending your efforts resolving them is not. But worry doesn't help you at all. So you just, when I look back at some of the issues that seemed insurmountable, they never really turn out to be.
I see. So I guess how I would sum up what you just said is just realize that everything will kind of work itself out.
Yeah, keep the energy positive. Resolve the issues. Don't spend time worrying about the issues, because worrying doesn't do anything but waste your time. You also realize that you can't spend a lot of time thinking about your mistakes. Mistakes aren't always the worst thing in the world. You learn a lot from mistakes, and if you can make a mistake and learn from it and get off, cheaply, so to speak, that's always a great thing. The mistakes are not a problem unless you make the same one 2 or 3 times. That's a problem. That's not even an issue. But you don't spend a lot of time worrying about your mistakes or the issues that are at hand. You just deal with them.
Yeah, I think I heard you say something like this before, like a mistake is like a cheap lesson or something like that. Or
Yeah.
You don't.
Especially if you can resolve it and you don't make it again.
So, what's your favorite failure? What's something that you think seemed like a failure, but maybe led to your own success or maybe a huge learning experience?
Yeah. Probably my biggest failures were the first 2 years I was here in town, 93 and 94, and part of 95, working for 2 other firms that the fit wasn't quite right. And I always felt like if the fit wasn't right, it was usually, my problem, my mistake. And I guess to some extent it is, because it takes 2 people or more, not to have a meeting of the minds. So I ended up, my first 2 firms that I worked for here were both a year each, and that had never happened with me before. In my prior, since 1981, my prior 12 years in the industry, I had never had a problem with my prior employer. I had usually left for a better opportunity, and that was the issue. In these 2 instances, the first year I left for a better opportunity, and the second one, it just was clear that I was not going to be able to work at that firm. Felt very bad about it, but it forced me to go out on my own, and it ended up being the best thing that ever happened, because I was then able to practice in the way I felt was right and correct. Not discrediting the mentorship even with that last firm, and what valuable lessons I learned with that firm. They were very productive, but again, I guess since I'm not still at that firm, I could call that a failure, but now I've got my own firm, and I consider that a success.
Yeah. It sounds like you've been very careful to notice the benefits of even the bad experiences.
I think that's correct, yeah. Yes.
Like you mentioned, not to discount the mentorship or anything like that. It sounds like looking back at those, you really just focused on what you learned there, rather than, dwelling on the fact that it didn't work, it didn't fit.
Yeah, although, like I said with the second firm, I was very disappointed in the fact that did not work, and I probably did worry about it, and that is where we started with this whole interview, basically saying if I were to do it again, I wouldn't worry about those, those mistakes and failures, because they ended up being probably the best building blocks for where I am now.
Definitely,
Yeah.
What would you say is some of your best advice for business people in general? How to be successful in business?
Well, I'm sure if you were to ask my partners and colleagues and other individuals that work at this firm, I'm like a broken record on this question, because I've always said the best advice I can give anyone when they're talking about outreach, advertising, building their practice, I think that the best advertisement is doing a good job for your client. And that is, if you've got a number of clients and those clients are very happy with your services, they're going to talk to a friend, a family member, a neighbor, a professional colleague, or another service person in their industry, whether it be an accountant or an investment advisor or a trust officer or whomever they might work with. And if they're saying positive things about you, that's going to help you build your practice. And it's like an ongoing, testimonial that keeps on giving, and it's a very broad base from which you can build your practice. And that's probably what I would say. The client's always right, and you try to make sure that the client is very happy with what you've done for them. And that'd be my advice. A lot of times people spend a lot of time, or so much time, and I know that the number of lawyers do that with advertising or speaking engagements or seminars, and I can tell that they're doing it so much it's detracting from the client service they're giving, and that positive of that exposure and outreach is maybe outweighed by the negative of maybe not returning a client phone call.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point. It's almost like it's maybe spending 10% more to make sure that your client receives a great product or experience instead of an okay one might be way better than having a marketing budget that's half of your total operating costs.
Right, or your other valuable resource, not just the cost, but the cost in time.
Mr. Braun, what was your favorite experience helping one of your clients?
Well, that's a hard question, because there's so many favorites. Unfortunately, I'm in a business where oftentimes the reason my client relationship has ended is not because they've decided to move their business elsewhere, but because they pass away. And then I have to work with the family, the surviving spouse and or family, and try to put them in a good place and try to make the estate administration as comfortable as possible. And when I can do that, those are all successes. But if I were to think about a single event that I'm really proud of, and I'm thinking of one instance where I was hired by a beneficiary of an estate, and that beneficiary was working with another attorney, and that attorney was representing this gentleman as trustee of a number of trusts that were being administered on behalf of his dad. And they had gotten to a point where there was a blended family, a second wife and kids from another marriage, etc. And there was some discord between the beneficiaries on what belonged to the deceased spouse, this gentleman's dad, and what belonged to the surviving spouse, the mom, but not his mom. And there was an attorney that was working through those issues and doing a settlement agreement among all the parties, but everybody had to have their own representation to sign off on the settlement agreement. So basically I was representing this gentleman as beneficiary while another attorney was representing him as trustee. But as trustee, he had to be neutral because he basically was, as trustee, needed to enforce the settlement agreement. However, it was resolved. But he also needed to protect his interests as beneficiary. So we went through all that, And his dad had died a couple years earlier, and they had already filed an estate tax return. And I said, well, let me get a better idea of what you did here. Let me look at the estate tax return that your attorney and you filed and the accountant prepared. And he was reluctant to show it to me because I wasn't really involved in the estate administration. I was just representing him in the settlement agreement. Within 5 minutes of looking at the estate tax return, I was able to recognize a mistake that had not been recognized by the other attorney or the accountant. It was a very technical mistake, and it wasn't recognized by any of the other attorneys that had reviewed this information in the settlement process. We ended up amending that return. Everybody was kind of interested in whether I was correct, and I recognized something in 5 minutes just from that meeting when he didn't even want me to review the agreement. And we had to amend the 706 and do a few other things, and that was expensive. It cost about $5,000 in fees to do that, but he got a $120,000 refund on that return. So it's a pretty good return on his investment. He spent $5,000 with me in a few minutes reviewing the return and I was able to find something that went unnoticed that brought $120,000 back into the estate.
Thank you, Mr. Braun, for all this great information. I got some great stuff out of it. I'm sure our viewers will as well. I really appreciate your time and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Tyler. I enjoyed it.